In America Falls Vol.2, the collapse of society has deepened into a brutal struggle for survival. As the remnants of civilization face relentless chaos, fractured communities battle for dwindling resources and power. Amid the ruins, a diverse band of survivors, each scarred by loss and hardened by desperation, must unite against hostile factions and the harsh elements. Their journey transforms into a fight not only to stay alive, but also to reclaim hope and forge a new future from the wreckage of a fallen America. The skeletal remains of downtown Portland loomed against the grey morning sky, a jagged monument to what once was. Sarah Winters stood on the cracked asphalt of what used to be Fifth Avenue, her weathered jacket pulled tight against the autumn chill. 58 years of life hadn't prepared her for this. Watching her world crumble in slow motion, "Over the past 7 months, we need to move," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the wind whistling through hollow buildings. At 32, his once youthful face now bore the permanent lines of someone who'd seen too much. The coalition scouts were spotted near the river yesterday. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the distant horizon where thin columns of smoke rose like ghostly fingers. She'd been a history professor before everything fell apart. Now history wasn't something to be taught, it was something to be survived. "How's Ellie holding up?" she asked, finally turning to face her companion. Marcus's expression softened slightly at the mention of his niece. Strong, stronger than any 12-year-old should have to be. Behind them, their makeshift caravan of survivors prepared for another day of movement. 17 people, once strangers, now family by necessity, gathering what remained of their lives into backpacks and repurposed shopping carts. Dr. Winters. The voice belonged to Miguel Ortiz, a former paramedic whose medical knowledge had saved them more times than anyone could count. "You need to see this." Sarah followed Miguel to where a small shortwave radio sat on the hood of a rust-speckled pickup truck. Static crackled through the speaker, occasionally broken by a human voice, the first broadcast they'd heard in weeks. Survivors near Clackamas County. Safe zone established, military presence, food and medical supplies. The voice faded back into static, leaving the small group in silence. Hope, that dangerous emotion they'd all learned to suppress, flickered across their faces. "Could be a trap," said Layla, a former software engineer whose cynicism had kept them alive through 3 ambushes. The reclamation group used the same tactic in Seattle. "Could be salvation," countered David, an elderly man who'd once been a carpenter. His arthritic hands clutched a wooden walking stick carved with notches, one for each day since the collapse. "What choice do we have?" Sarah felt the weight of their expectant gazes. Somehow, she'd become their leader, not by choice or vote, but by the simple fact that when decisions needed making, they turned to her. The responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, a burden she carried alongside memories of a world that no longer existed. "We verify first," she said finally. "Marcus, take Ren and Scout ahead. Stay hidden, assess the situation, then report back. No risks, no contact." She turned to the others. "Meanwhile, we prepare to move, but cautiously. If this is legitimate, we need to be ready. If it's not..." She let the implication hang in the cold air. As the group dispersed to their tasks, Sarah walked to the edge of their camp, where Ellie sat cross-legged on a concrete barrier, sketching in a tattered notebook. The girl didn't look up as Sarah approached, her pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the paper. "What are you drawing today?" Sarah asked, settling beside her. Ellie tilted the notebook, revealing a detailed sketch of their group. Not as they were now, haggard and worn, but as she imagined they might have been before. Smiling, clean, whole. "I'm trying to remember," Ellie said softly. "Mom always said artists are the memory keepers." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Ellie's mother, Marcus's sister, hadn't survived the first wave of violence when food distribution centers collapsed. "She was right," Sarah replied, gently touching the edge of the drawing. "And someday your art will help rebuild what we've lost. In the distance, a sudden explosion shattered the morning quiet, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Both turned toward the sound, coming from the direction of their supposed safe zone. "That doesn't sound like salvation," Ellie whispered, closing her notebook. Sarah stood, her hand instinctively moving to the hunting knife at her belt. "Stay here with Miguel. I need to find Marcus." Before she could move, a motorcycle's engine roared from the street behind them. A rider in mismatched tactical gear skidded to a stop near their camp, helmet visor concealing their face. The group's few armed members immediately raised their weapons. The rider slowly raised both hands, then removed the helmet. A woman with a scarred face and close-cropped grey. Hare surveyed them with calculating eyes. "You folks heading toward the broadcast?" she asked, her voice raspy. Sarah stepped forward. "We're considering it." The woman's laugh held no humor. "Then you're walking into a slaughter. The coalition is rounding up anyone they can find. They need workers for their compounds." She paused, looking over the group. "But I represent another option. We call ourselves the Restoration. We're building something sustainable at the old mountain resort, something worth fighting for." "Why should we trust you?" Layla called out. The woman nodded as if she'd expected the question. "You shouldn't." Trust died with the old world. She tossed a map toward Sarah. "But if you change your mind, this will lead you to us. We leave at sundown, with or without you." Before anyone could respond, she donned her helmet and roared away, leaving them in a cloud of dust and uncertainty. Sarah unfolded the map, detailed, hand-drawn, marking dangers and safe passages through the city and into the mountains beyond. Something about its precision felt authentic, a product of hard-earned knowledge. "What do we do?" Miguel asked, the question hanging in the air like the distant smoke. Sarah looked at the faces around her, each carrying the weight of their lost world, each still somehow clinging to the possibility of tomorrow. "We survive," she answered simply. "Today, tomorrow, and the day after that, until surviving becomes living again." She tucked the map into her jacket pocket. First, they needed to find Marcus and Wren. Then they would decide, coalition, restoration, or their own path through the ashes of America. As the group moved to break camp, Sarah glanced back at the city skyline one last time. Somewhere in those ruins were answers, threats, possibilities, and by nightfall they would need to choose which direction their future lay. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cold grey light filtered through a broken skylight as Sarah paced the abandoned warehouse floor. Marcus and Renshud have returned hours ago from their scouting mission. The distant rumble of explosions had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt more threatening than gunfire. "We need to make a decision," Layla said, checking her watch, a habit from the old world that seemed almost comical now. "If we're meeting this restoration group, we've got less than 2 hours until sundown. We're not leaving without Marcus." "And Wren," Sarah stated firmly, her eyes fixed on the warehouse entrance. Miguel approached with a steaming cup of pine needle tea. "The group is getting restless, Sarah. Some want to try for the safe zone broadcast, despite the warnings. Others want to follow the map to the mountain resort. We're fracturing." Sarah accepted the tea, letting the warmth seep into her calloused hands. "Division is what destroyed us in the first place," she murmured. "When the power grid failed and supply chains collapsed, we turned on each other instead of coming together." "People are scared," Miguel replied. "Fear doesn't inspire unity, unless someone shows them something worth unifying for." The voice came from behind them. Sarah turned to see David leaning on his notched walking stick. Despite his 73 years, his eyes remained sharp with a quiet wisdom. "In my lifetime, I've seen this country weather storms that should have broken us," David continued. "The difference was leadership, people who could articulate not just a plan for survival, but a vision worth surviving for. The warehouse door creaked open, cutting their conversation short. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons. A moment later, Ren stumbled in, supporting a badly wounded Marcus. Sarah and Miguel rushed forward. "Ambush!" Ren gasped as they lowered Marcus to the floor. Blood soaked through his makeshift bandage. Coalition forces everywhere. The broadcast was bait. Miguel immediately began examining Marcus's wound, a deep gash across his ribs. "I need my kit. Pressure here," I instructed Sarah, placing her hands over the bleeding wound. Ellie pushed through the gathering crowd, her face draining of color at the sight of her uncle. "Is he going to—" "He'll be fine," Sarah assured her quickly, though the amount of blood suggested otherwise. "Go help Miguel find his medical kit." As Ellie ran to help, Marcus gripped Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "They're coming!" he whispered, his voice ragged. "Coalition tracked us. Armored vehicles, 20, maybe 30 fighters." Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "How long?" "An hour. Maybe less." His eyes fluttered. "Had to warn you." "You did good," she assured him, squeezing his hand as Miguel returned with supplies. "Rest now." Sarah stood, wiping blood on her already stained jeans, and faced the group. Fear was palpable in the air, but she couldn't afford to let it spread. "We have less than an hour," she announced, her voice steady despite the churning in her gut. "The coalition is coming, and we need to be gone before they arrive." "Gone where?" someone called out. "If the safe zone is a trap." "The mountain resort," Sarah decided, pulling out the map the motorcycle rider had given them. "The restoration may be our only option now." "How do we know they're any better than the coalition?" Layla challenged. "We'd be walking into another trap." "We don't know," Sarah admitted, "but staying here means certain capture, and Marcus has confirmed what the rider warned us about. The coalition is using people as forced labor. At least with the restoration, we have a chance." A murmur of disagreement rippled through the group. Trust, already fragile, was shattering under the weight of fear. "I'm not going," announced Kyle, a former construction worker whose strength had helped them fortify multiple shelters. "My brother might be at that safe zone. I'm taking my chances there." Several others nodded in agreement. The fracture Sarah had feared was becoming a chasm, splitting. "That reduces everyone's chances," she argued, but saw the determination hardening on several faces. She recognized the look. She'd worn it herself in the early days. "When fear and hope collide, logic rarely prevails. Then we split supplies evenly," she finally conceded, "and we establish a rendezvous point in case either group needs to change." "Yours." As they began dividing their meager resources, Ellie approached Sarah, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "I want to stay with you," she said quietly, "but Uncle Marcus will need someone when he wakes up." Sarah knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "Your uncle will be coming with us to the mountains. Miguel thinks he can be moved, if we're careful, and he'll need that medical outpost the map mentions." Relief flooded Ellie's face, quickly replaced by concern as she glanced at the splintering group. "Why can't everyone stay together? Isn't it safer?" "Sometimes people need to follow different paths," Sarah explained gently, "even when it's dangerous. Like the pioneers in your history books?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Something like that. They were searching for a better life too." 40 minutes later, their once unified group stood in the warehouse parking lot, now divided into two. 9 would head toward the coalition broadcast despite the risks. 8, including Sarah, Marcus, Ellie, Miguel, David, and Layla, would follow. The map to the mountain resort. Kyle stepped forward, awkwardness in his posture. "If things go south for us..." "The map shows a radio tower at the resort," Sarah said, pointing to the marking. "If it's operational, we'll broadcast one emergency. Frequency 7 every day at noon." "Same for us, if the safe zone is legitimate," Kyle agreed. An uncomfortable silence fell between groups that had depended on each other for months. Finally, David stepped forward, his aged hands gripping his walking stick. "In the old days, When DZ settlers would separate on the Oregon Trail, they would exchange tokens, he said, pulling a carved wooden medallion from his pocket. A symbol that despite different paths, they remained connected by shared experience. He broke the medallion in half, handing one piece to Kyle. May your road lead to safety, and perhaps one day back to's. The simple ceremony seemed to ease. The tension, handshakes and brief hugs followed, the human connection momentarily stronger than the fear driving them apart. As they prepared to leave in opposite directions, a distant mechanical rumble echoed through the streets. The coalitions. Vehicles, right on schedule. Move now, Sarah ordered. Stay low, stay quiet. With one last look at their former companions, Sarah's group slipped into the shadows of abandoned buildings, following the map's path toward the foothills. Behind them, the other group headed east, toward the supposed safe zone. As they navigated, through debris-filled alleys, Marcus's arm draped across Miguel's shoulders, Sarah felt the weight of her decision pressing down. Had she chosen correctly? Was she leading them to sanctuary or to another kind of danger? The map showed a drainage tunnel that would take them beneath the city's outer ring, avoiding coalition checkpoints. As they approached the rusted entrance, Sarah noticed Ellie had fallen behind, looking back toward the warehouse. "They'll be okay," Sarah said, not knowing if it was true. Ellie nodded, her young face solemn. "I know. I just wanted to remember what it looked like. For later." She tapped her sketchbook. "When I draw the story of how America fell, and how we rebuilt it." Sarah's throat tightened at the simple faith in the girl's words. "Come on," she said, taking Ellie's hand. "Let's go find out if the restoration lives up to its name." As they disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, the echo of coalition vehicles grew louder behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility, the chance that somewhere in these broken lands, America wasn't just falling. It was also slowly being reborn. Before we continue this journey, tell us where you're watching from. And if you're invested in our survivors' fate, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's episode will reveal what awaits them in the mountain. Sanctuary. Water dripped from cracked concrete overhead, the steady rhythm marking their passage through the abandoned drainage tunnel. The beam of Sarah's flashlight, batteries precious and dwindling, swept across graffiti-covered walls, strange, testaments to both the world before and the chaos that followed. "The end is now," proclaimed one spray-painted message. Beside it, newer paint declared, "The beginning comes after." "How much farther?" Layla whispered, her voice amplified by the tunnel's acoustics. She supported Ellie, who had twisted her ankle. An hour into their journey, Sarah consulted the map, now smudged with dirt and sweat. "Another half-mile until the outlet. Then we follow Multnomah Creek into the foothills." Marcus groaned as Miguel adjusted the makeshift stretcher they'd constructed from jackets and broken signposts. His fever had spiked, the wound at his side angry and inflamed, despite Miguel's careful cleaning. "He needs antibiotics," Miguel murmured, low enough that Ellie couldn't hear. "And proper medical care. Soon." Sarah nodded grimly. The map indicated a medical station at the restoration camp. If it existed, if they could reach it in time, if it wasn't another elaborate trap. Too many ifs for comfort. "We'll rest here for 10 minutes, she announced, finding a relatively dry section of tunnel. "David, how are you holding up?" The elderly man lowered himself carefully to a concrete ledge, his breathing labored. "I've had better hikes," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I've had worse days too. At least no one's shooting at us." As if summoned by his words, a distant echo of voices bounced through the tunnel behind them. Sarah immediately killed her flashlight, plunging them into near-total darkness. "Coalition?" Layla mouthed, barely audible. Sarah pressed her finger to her lips, straining to listen. The voices grew closer, 3, maybe 4 people, speaking in hushed tones. A beam of light swept around a distant curve in the tunnel. "Told you they came this way," a male voice insisted. "Fresh tracks in the mud." Could be anyone, replied a woman. These tunnels are refugee highways now. Sarah signaled to her group, pointing toward the tunnel's continuation ahead of them. They needed to move, silently and immediately. Miguel and Layla carefully lifted Marcus, whose feverish state made him mercifully quiet. David helped Ellie to her feet, and they began inching forward in the darkness. Sarah remained at the rear, her hand on the hunting knife at her belt. The approaching group could be coalition scouts, scavengers, or even other refugees. None guaranteed. To be friendly, they had progressed perhaps 50 yards when disaster struck. David's walking stick, worn smooth from months of use, slipped on the damp concrete. He caught himself before falling, but the stick clattered loudly against the tunnel wall. The approaching lights immediately stopped, then began moving faster. "Who's there?" a sharp voice called out. "Identify yourselves." Sarah made a split-second decision. "Run," she whispered urgently to her group. "Now!" They abandoned stealth for speed, splashing through shallow puddles as they raced ahead. Behind them, their pursuers broke into a sprint. "Stop or we'll shoot," the voice commanded, echoing ominously. Ellie stumbled, crying out in pain as she put weight on her injured ankle. Sarah scooped the girl up without breaking stride, her muscles protesting the additional burden. Ahead, a faint glow of daylight appeared. The tunnel outlet. If they could reach it, the surrounding forest might provide cover. A gunshot cracked through the tunnel, the bullet ricocheting off concrete somewhere to their left. Warning shot, Sarah's mind registered dimly. If they'd wanted to hit us, they would have. "Last warning," the voice shouted. "We're not coalition." Something in the voice, a particular inflection, a hint of desperation rather than authority, made Sarah hesitate. She slowed, then stopped, turning to face their pursuers with Ellie still in her arms. "Prove it," she called back, as her group also halted, looking at her in confusion. The approaching lights lowered, revealing 4 figures. 2 men and 2 women, all wearing mismatched outdoor gear rather than the uniform tactical equipment favored by coalition forces. "We're restoration scouts," the lead woman said, stepping forward cautiously. "Sent to guide survivors from the city. Arida was supposed to make contact." "She did," Sarah confirmed, still not lowering Ellie to the ground. "She gave us a map." Relief visibly washed over the woman's face. "Thank God! We've been searching these tunnels for hours after Cher reported your group might be coming." Her eyes fell on Marcus's prone form. "You have wounded. Knife wound. Infected," Miguel explained. "He needs medical attention urgently." The woman nodded to her companions, who immediately moved toward Marcus with practiced efficiency. "I'm Hannah," she said, holstering her weapon. "Head of security for the eastern approach. Sorry about the shot. We've had issues with coalition infiltrators." Recently, Sarah finally set Ellie down but kept a protective arm around her shoulders. "I'm Sarah. This is Ellie, David, Miguel, and Layla. The wounded man is Marcus." Hannah surveyed their bedraggled group with experienced eyes. "You all look dead on your feet. Our base camp is about 2 miles from here. We have transportation, not—" "Going to blindfold us?" Layla asked suspiciously. "Take our weapons?" A flicker of amusement crossed Hannah's weathered face. "If we wanted to hurt you, we would have done it already. Besides, in this world, taking someone's ability to defend themselves is the same as signing their death warrant." She gestured toward the tunnel exit. "But we should move quickly. Coalition patrols have been pushing into this area since yesterday." With little choice but to trust, they followed Hannah's group out of the tunnel and into the damp forest beyond. True to her word, 2 camouflaged all-terrain vehicles waited in a small clearing, hidden under branches and forest debris. As they carefully loaded Marcus into one vehicle, Ellie tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Look," she whispered, pointing skyward. Through breaks in the forest canopy, Sarah could see a massive plume of black smoke rising from the direction of Thessity. The warehouse district, where they had sheltered, where their friends had headed. Back toward the false safe zone, Hannah followed their gaze. Coalitions burning everything they can't use or control, she explained grimly. Been that way since they took power in what used to be the Pacific Command. Our friends, Sarah began, her voice catching. Some of our group went toward their broadcast. Hannah's expression told the story before her words did. I'm sorry. The coalition doesn't take prisoners anymore, not unless they need specific skills. She looked away from the smoke. All we can do now is make sure they didn't die for nothing. No sé so. Drive through increasingly rugged terrain was jarring, every bump sending waves of pain across Marcus's face, despite the field medicine the restoration scouts had administered. Twice they diverted from their path to avoid coalition drones buzzing overhead. How much territory do they control? Sarah asked, bracing herself as they forded a shallow stream. Too much, Hannah replied, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. West Coast from San Francisco to Seattle, pushing eastward. They started as military holdouts with good intentions, maintaining order, protecting civilians. Somewhere along the way, survival became domination. And the restoration? David asked. What are your intentions? Hannah glanced back at him, something like respect in her expression. Rebuilding, not just surviving. Agriculture, medicine, education, governance, starting small, growing carefully. A faint smile crossed her face. Our founder has a saying, we're not trying to restore what was, we're building what should have been. As they crested a ridge, the forest opened to reveal a sweeping valley below. Nestled against the mountainside stood what had once been a luxury resort. Now, the sprawling complex had been transformed. Gardens terraced the surrounding slopes. A small hydroelectric station harnessed the power of a mountain stream. Greenhouses glinted in the afternoon sun. People moved purposefully between buildings, carrying tools, pushing wheelbarrows, tending crops. Welcome to Mount Haven, Hannah announced. Population 400 and growing. Sarah stared in disbelief. After months of desperate survival, the sight of organized human endeavor felt almost foreign. A glimpse of the world they'd lost. It's beautiful, Ellie whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. As they descended toward the compound, Sarah noticed defensive positions cleverly integrated into the landscape, watchtowers camouflaged as hunting blinds, barriers disguised as decorative walls, sniper posts hidden among rocky outcrops. Paradise with teeth, she murmured. Hannah overheard. We learned early that peace requires protection, she said simply. Everyone contributes to defense, same as they do to food production or education. Their vehicles rolled through a heavily guarded entrance, where the restoration symbol, a stylized phoenix rising from flames, had been painted over the resort's original sign. People stopped, their work to watch the newcomers with undisguised curiosity. Medical first, Hannah instructed as they came to a stop outside a building marked with a red cross. Medical personnel immediately swarmed around Marcus, transferring him to a proper stretcher and whisking him inside. Go with them, Sarah told Miguel and Ellie. We'll find you after. As the others followed Marcus, Hannah led Sarah, David, and Layla toward what had once been the resort's main lodge. Our leader will want to meet you immediately, she explained. We've been tracking coalition movements for weeks. Any information you have could be vital. The lodge's interior had been transformed into a command center. Maps covered walls marked with pins and annotations. Radio equipment hummed quietly in one corner. People worked at stations constructed from repurposed furniture, some analyzing documents, others maintaining communications with what Sarah assumed were outposts or patrols. At the center of this organized chaos stood a woman in her 60s, leaning over a large table map, deep in discussion with several advisors. She looked up as they entered, her expression sharpening with interest. With a shock of recognition, Sarah realized it was the same motorcycle rider who had given them the map, though now without the helmet and road gear, her authority was unmistakable. Dr. Winters, The woman greeted her, straightening. "I'm glad you decided to join us, though I see your group has gotten smaller since our first meeting." Sarah tensed. "How do you know my name? I never introduced myself." The woman smiled slightly. "You are quite well known in academic circles, Dr. Winters. Your book on civic resilience during historical crises was required reading here even before the collapse." She extended her hand. "Eleanor Chen, former Secretary of Health and Human Services, now just another survivor trying to build something that lasts." Sarah shook the offered hand, her mind reeling at the implications. A cabinet member here, leading this community. "We have much to discuss," Eleanor continued, her manner shifting from welcoming to urgent. "The coalition is planning something significant, and your arrival coincides with disturbing intelligence from our western outposts." "What kind of intelligence?" Layla asked sharply. Eleanor's gaze swept across their group, assessing, calculating. "The kind that suggests we may be running out of time, not just for Mount Haven, but for any hope of rebuilding what we've lost." She gestured toward the map table, where red markers indicated coalition positions steadily encroaching from multiple directions. "Welcome to the restoration," Eleanor said grimly. "You've arrived just in time for what might be our final stand. Before we continue this harrowing journey, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're gripped by the plight of our survivors, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's chapter will reveal the full extent of the coalition's terrifying plans. Biological warfare. Eleanor's words hung in the air of the command center, heavy as lead. "Our intelligence suggests the coalition is developing weaponized pathogens at their Portland research facility." Sarah stared at the satellite images spread across the table, grainy but clear enough to show the converted pharmaceutical plant with its new security perimeter and strange ventilation modifications. "Are you certain?" she asked, her academic mind automatically seeking verification, evidence, peer review, all luxuries of a world that no longer existed. "As certain as we can be," Eleanor replied, nodding to a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who stood nearby. "Dr. Patel was CDC before. He analyzed the intel." Dr. Patel stepped forward, his movements precise, despite evident exhaustion. "3 of our people infiltrated as maintenance workers. 2 died within days of exposure, hemorrhagic symptoms consistent with engineered viral agents. The 3rd managed to send these photos before succumbing." He pointed to clinical images that made Sarah's stomach turn. "Whatever they're developing, it's designed for maximum lethality, with minimal resources needed for deployment." "Why?" David asked, the simple question cutting through technical details to the heart of the matter. "What purpose does wiping out more her people serve?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "Control. The coalition leadership believes the collapse didn't go far enough. Too many survivors, too scattered to govern effectively. They want to," she hesitated, "reset the board, eliminate resistance and independent settlements, then rebuild with only those they choose to spare." Layla crossed her arms, skepticism evident. "And you know this how?" "Because I was there when they first proposed it," Eleanor said quietly. "Before I fled with everyone I could convince to come with me. General Harmon believes the only path forward is to burn what remains and start fresh. He calls it necessary cauterization." A heavy silence fell over the group. Sarah thought of Marcus, fighting infection in the medical building, of Ellie, sketching her visions of a rebuilt world, of the countless unnamed survivors scattered across the broken landscape. "What's your plan?" she finally asked. Eleanor exchanged glances with Hannah. "We need to destroy their research and production facility before they can distribute the pathogen. Our intelligence suggests they're less than 2 weeks from deployment." "A strike team," Hannah elaborated. "Small, fast, with the specific skills needed to infiltrate the facility and sabotage their work. We've been preparing for months, gathering intelligence, training personnel." Sarah noticed how both women's eyes lingered on her. Why are you telling us this? Because one of our team was captured last week, Eleanor answered. Our chemical engineer. Without someone who understands how to properly destroy their samples and research without risking release. She left the implication hanging. You need a replacement, Layla finished flatly. And you think one of us fits the bill? Eleanor nodded. Dr. Winters, your background in historical crisis response gives you unique insight into how these situations unfold. And Ms. Rahman, she turned to Layla, your experience in systems engineering would be invaluable for disabling their security and containment protocols. Sarah and Layla exchanged startled looks. You've researched us, Sarah realized. Everyone who enters Mount Haven, Eleanor confirmed unapologetically. Knowledge is survival. Before either could respond, the command center door burst open. Miguel stood there, his medical scrubs splattered with blood. Marcus is stabilized, he announced, his voice betraying his exhaustion. But there's something you need to know. When his fever broke, he started talking about the coalition facility. He was there, Sarah, 3 months ago, before he joined your group. He worked maintenance. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What? They recruited him for his mechanical skills. He didn't know what they were developing at first. When he figured it out, he escaped. He's been running ever since, trying to find someone who could stop them. Miguel looked directly at Eleanor. He says they're calling it Purity Protocol, a tailored virus that targets specific genetic markers. Eugenics, Dr. Patel breathed, horror evident in his voice. They're designing a pathogen that would kill selectively based on genetic traits. Eleanor's composed facade cracked slightly. That's worse than we thought. If they can target specific populations. She turned to Hannah. Move up the timeline. We go in 3 days, not 2 weeks. Wait, Sarah interjected. This is moving too fast. You're talking about sending people, possibly us, into a heavily guarded bioweapons facility with almost no preparation. The alternative is waiting for them to release a designer plague, Hannah countered. We're out of better options. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. I need to see Marcus, she said finally, and we need time to consider this. Eleanor nodded. You have until tomorrow morning, but understand, whether you join us or not, we're proceeding with the mission. The stakes are too high for delay. Sarah found Ellie sitting beside Marcus's bed in the medical facility, sketching his sleeping form with delicate strokes. The girl looked up as Sarah entered, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Miguel says he's going to be okay, she whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might reverse his progress. Sarah studied Marcus's face, now peaceful in drug-induced sleep. This man had carried such a burden, fleeing with knowledge that could save countless lives, never revealing why he sometimes woke screaming from nightmares. Ellie, I need to speak with your uncle when he wakes up. Alone. The girl nodded, understanding the gravity in Sarah's tone. I'll go find David. He said he'd show me the greenhouse. After Ellie left, Sarah pulled a chair to Marcus's bedside and waited. It wasn't long before his eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on her with surprising clarity. You know, he stated rather than asked. Why didn't you tell us? The question held no accusation, only genuine bewilderment. Marcus turned his gaze to the ceiling. At first, I didn't trust anyone. Then, when I did trust you, I was ashamed. I helped build the ventilation system, Sarah. I have the blood of the test subjects. On my hands, test subjects, Sarah repeated, dread pooling in her stomach. Prisoners, refugees, anyone they caught who matched their genetic profiles for testing. His voice broke. I didn't know until I saw them bringing in the children. Then I sabotaged what I could and ran. Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life, of manual labor now transformed into a desperate fight for redemption. The Restoration is planning a strike on the facility, she told him. They want Layla and me to join the team. Marcus's grip tightened painfully. Don't. That place is a fortress. The security systems, the armed guards, it's suicide. And if we do nothing, then millions die. He closed his eyes, resignation washing over his features. But there might be another way. I didn't just work there. I helped design the environmental controls. I know ways in that even their security doesn't monitor. Sarah leaned closer. Tell me everything. By evening, Sarah had gathered their small group in the quarters assigned to them, a former luxury suite now repurposed with practical furnishings. Marcus had been moved there against medical advice, insisting he needed to be part of the planning. The ventilation maintenance tunnels run beneath the entire facility, he explained, his voice stronger after rest and medication. On the table before them, he had sketched the facility's layout from memory. Monthly inspections were my responsibility. The access points are here, here, and here. Layla studied the drawings intently. What about internal security, guards, cameras? Camera. Blind spots are marked, Marcus pointed. Guard rotations are clockwise at 30-minute intervals. Their search levels have biometric access. But I can bypass the secondary systems through the environmental controls. It could work, Layla admitted. Reluctantly, with the right team and precise timing, I'm going, Marcus stated flatly. No one else knows those systems like I do. You can barely stand, Miguel objected. I'll be stronger in 3 days. Sarah watched the determination in his eyes, the need for atonement evident in every line of his face. She recognized it, had seen it in her own reflection during dark moments in the months since the collapse. If Marcus goes, I go, she decided. Layla, the former software engineer sighed. Someone needs to make sure you two don't get yourselves killed. Her attempt at humor couldn't mask the fear beneath. David cleared his throat. I'll remain with Ellie and Miguel. The girl will need familiar faces if... He paused. When your turn. The weight of their decision settled over the room. Outside their window, Mount Haven continued its evening routines. People returning from work details, lights appearing in windows, the hum of a community that had found purpose amid devastation. What if we fail? Layla asked softly. Then the restoration will fall. Then other settlements, then whatever remains of civilization, Sarah answered honestly. But if we succeed, we give humanity a chance to rebuild without living under the shadow of genocidal control. A knock at their door interrupted further discussion. Hannah entered, her posture tense. Eleanor wants to see you. Now. Her gaze swept over the papers on the table. All of you. They found Eleanor in her private office, a former presidential suite converted into living quarters and workspace. Maps and communication equipment dominated one wall. The other held bookshelves. Philosophy, history, governance, agriculture, the collected wisdom they would need to rebuild. We have a problem, she announced without preamble. Our perimeter sensors detected coalition drones 6 miles out. They're mapping our defenses. How did they find you? Sarah asked. Eleanor's gaze hardened. That's what I need to know. Until today, we've been a ghost settlement, rumors and whispers. Nothing concrete enough for them to locate. Her implication hung in the air. You think we led them here? Layla stated flatly. I think it's one hell of a coincidence that coalition scouts appear hours after your arrival, Hannah countered from the doorway. Or maybe your security isn't as perfect as you thought, Marcus shot back. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. What matters now is our response. Their ground forces won't be far behind the reconnaissance drones. We need to accelerate. All plans? The strike team, Sarah asked. Leaves tomorrow at dawn, not in 3 days, with or without you. Eleanor fixed them with an unwavering stare. I need your decision now. Sarah looked at Marcus and Layla, seeing the same realization in their eyes. Whatever doubts or preparations they'd hoped for had just evaporated with the coalition's approach. We're in, she answered for all of them. But we'll need to brief your team on Marcus's entry plan tonight. Eleanor nodded, visible relief breaking through her commanding demeanor. Thank you. Hannah will take you to meet the strike team immediately." As they turned to leave, Eleanor called after them, "Dr. Winters, Sarah." Her voice softened slightly. "In another life, I'd never ask civilians to undertake a military mission, but we're all soldiers now, fighting for what remains of humanity." She picked up a worn copy of Sarah's book from her desk. "Your research on how societies rebuild after catastrophe gave me the blueprint for the restoration. Now I'm asking you to ensure we have the chance to follow it." The weight of those words followed Sarah as Hannah led them through the darkening compound toward a separate building where the strike team waited. Around them, the restoration community continued its evening routines, unaware that both their discovery and possible salvation had arrived on the same day. "If we don't come back," Sarah said quietly to Hannah, "make sure Ellie knows we tried to build the world she keeps drawing in her sketchbook." Hannah's normally stern expression softened momentarily. "She won't have to imagine it. We'll build it together after you return." She paused before opening the door to the strike team's quarters. "Ready to meet the people who'll be keeping you alive tomorrow?" Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. From professor to survivor to resistance fighter, another transformation. In a world that demanded constant reinvention. "Ready," she answered, stepping forward to meet whatever fate awaited on the other side. Before we follow our survivors into the heart of danger, tell us in the comments if you'd have the courage to join this mission, and make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's chapter reveals the strike team's desperate infiltration of the coalition's deadliest facility. The strike team gathered in pre-dawn darkness, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of tactical displays. Captain Reed Blackwood, former Special Forces, now Restoration Security Chief, traced a finger along their planned route on a digital map. "We move in 3 vehicles. Alpha Team creates a diversion here at the western checkpoint. Beta Team provides overwatch from this ridge. Gamma Team, that's us, infiltrates through the maintenance tunnels Marcus identified." Sarah studied the 5 other members of Gamma Team. Besides herself, Layla, and Marcus, there was Blackwood himself, a weathered man in his 40s, with calculating eyes. Zoe Chen, Eleanor's daughter and demolitions expert, and Jackson Torres, a former pharmaceutical researcher who understood the biolab protocols they would need to navigate. "Once inside," Blackwood continued, "we have 90 minutes to reach the central lab, destroy their research and samples, and extract through this drainage canal. Any longer, and Alpha Team will be overrun." "What if the access tunnels are guarded?" Layla asked, voicing the question that had kept Sarah awake most of the night. "Then we adapt," Blackwood answered simply. "This mission succeeds or thousands die. There is no middle ground." As the others made final equipment checks, Sarah found herself standing beside Zoe, who was meticulously packing explosive charges into a specialized backpack. "Your mother," Sarah began hesitantly, "she's sending her own daughter on this mission?" Zoe didn't look up from her work. "She offered to send someone else. I refused." Her hands never faltered in their precise movements. "My brother died in the early coalition purges. This isn't just about saving others. It's about justice." Sarah recognized the cold determination in the young woman's voice, the personal stake that transformed a dangerous mission into a necessary crusade. Each of them carried similar wounds, she realized. Marcus with his guilt, Blackwood with his military oath to protect civilians, Jackson with colleagues who'd likely been forced to develop every weapons they now sought to destroy. The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Eleanor appeared, accompanied by Ellie, Miguel, and David. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of the girl, who should have been safely asleep at this hour. "I wanted to say goodbye," Ellie explained, her voice small but determined. She clutched, her sketchbook to her chest-like armor. Sarah knelt to eye level with the child. "We'll be back before you know it," she promised, the lie tasting bitter but necessary. Ellie's eyes, too perceptive for her 12 years, saw through the false assurance. "I made something for you," she said, opening her sketchbook to remove a folded page. "Don't look at it until you're coming home." Sarah tucked the drawing into her jacket pocket, next to her heart. "It's a deal." Eleanor stepped forward, her leaders. Mask momentarily set aside. "Mount Haven will begin evacuation procedures while you're gone. If the Coalition found us, this location is compromised regardless of your mission's outcome." "Where will you go?" Layla asked. "We have contingency sites prepared. David and Miguel will assist with medical transport." Eleanor's eyes lingered on her daughter. "When you succeed, find us using the emergency frequency." The use of when, rather than if, hung in the air, deliberate psychological framing that Sarah, as a former professor, recognized instantly. Build confidence, assume success, create a self-fulfilling prophecy. "It's time," Blackwood announced, checking his watch. The final goodbyes were brief, weighted with unspoken fears. As Sarah climbed into the transport vehicle, a modified SUV with reinforced plating, she caught a last glimpse of Ellie standing between Miguel and David, her small hand raised in farewell. "Extraction point Delta if we get separated," Blackwood reminded them as the vehicles pulled away from Mount Haven. "No waiting beyond the 10-minute window. If you're not there, you find your own way back." The drive through mountain roads was tense and silent. Dawn gradually illuminated a landscape reclaimed by nature, abandoned vehicles pushed to roadsides, businesses with shattered windows, suburban homes with overgrown lawns. Nature erasing humanity's footprint with methodical patience. 2 clicks out, the driver announced, as they approached the outskirts of what had once been Gresham, now a coalition-controlled sector. "Alpha team in position." They abandoned the vehicles in the cover of a collapsed highway overpass, continuing on foot through drainage channels that Marcus had once helped maintain. The smell of stagnant water and decay enveloped them as they splashed through ankle-deep muck. "Security checkpoint ahead," Marcus whispered, his face pale with pain and exertion. The wound in his side was clearly troubling him despite Miguel's treatments. "Maintenance access is behind that processing plant." On cue, a thunderous explosion echoed from the western perimeter. Alpha Team's diversion had begun. "Move now," Blackwood ordered, as Coalition forces audibly redirected toward the disturbance. They sprinted across open ground to a rusted service door. Marcus punched a code into the keypad, maintenance systems still operating on old protocols. Despite the new regime, the door clicked open, revealing a narrow utility tunnel bathed in emergency lighting. "They never change low-priority access codes," Marcus explained as they slipped inside. "Too many systems, too few tech personnel since the collapse." The tunnel descended into the earth, eventually branching into a complex network that serviced the sprawling facility above. Marcus led them confidently, though Sarah noticed him leaning increasingly on the walls for support. "Primary lab is 2 levels up from here," he murmured, pausing at an intersection to consult his hand-drawn map. "Ventilation. Hub should be—" The sound of voices ahead froze them in place. Blackwood signaled for silence, drawing his weapon. 2 maintenance workers rounded the corner, stopping in shock at the sight of armed intruders. Before they could react, Zoe and Jackson moved with practiced efficiency, subduing and restraining the workers without raising an alarm. "They're not Coalition. Military," Jackson observed, noting their standard work uniforms. "Probably local conscripts. They'll still report us the minute they're free," Blackwood noted grimly, his implication clear. "No," Sarah intervened, stepping between Blackwood and the terrified workers. "We're not them. We don't kill civilians." She addressed the captives directly. "You know what they're developing upstairs, don't you? You've seen the-test subjects, the body bags." One worker, barely more than a boy, averted his eyes. The other, an older man, gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Help us stop it," Sarah urged, "or at least don't stop us." After a tense moment, the older worker spoke. "Equipment. Room 50 meters ahead. Lock us inside. It'll look like we were doing inventory when the alarm sounds." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, as Blackwood reluctantly agreed to the plan. Once the workers were secured, they continued through the maze of tunnels until reaching a large ventilation shaft. According to Marcus's map, it led directly to the research. Level. Motion sensors above, Marcus warned, examining the shaft entrance. Need to loop the feed before we climb. Layla connected a small device to the security panel. Working on it, she murmured, fingers flying across the interface. 3 minutes. While they waited, Sarah noticed Marcus leaning heavily against the wall, his breathing labored. When she reached toward him, her hand came away damp with blood. His wound had reopened. "You can't keep going," she whispered urgently. "I have to," he countered. "You need me to bypass the lab security." Before she could argue further, Layla signaled success. "Motion sensors disabled. We have 20 minutes before the system automatically resets." They ascended the shaft in tense silence, emerging into a sterile utility corridor, distinctly different from the maintenance tunnels below. Clinical white walls, recessed lighting, air that smelled of disinfectant. They had reached the research level. "Biocontainment lab is through 2 security checkpoints," Jackson whispered, orienting himself. "We'll need clearance." On cue, Blackwood produced a security card, courtesy of an informant, should get us through the first door at least. The card worked, allowing them into an antechamber where scientists would normally don protective equipment. The room was empty, shift change, according to their intelligence. "Second checkpoint requires biometric authorization," Marcus noted, examining the scanner beside the inner door. "I can bypass this from here. Then we wait for someone with clearance," Blackwood decided. They didn't wait long. Within minutes, the outer door opened, and a tired-looking scientist entered. Her momentary surprise at finding others in the antechamber quickly transformed to terror as she registered their weapons. "Please," she began, raising her hands. "I'm just a research assistant. I don't—" "Dr. Helen Chen," Jackson interrupted, recognizing her. "We worked together at Berkeley before." His voice hardened. "Before you decided to help develop ethnic-specific bioweapons," the woman's face crumpled. "They have my family. Cooperate or they die. Those were the terms." Her eyes darted to the security cameras. "They're watching us right now. You have maybe 30 seconds before security responds." Sarah made a split-second decision. "Help us destroy the research, and we'll help extract your family." Disbelief warred with desperate hope on the scientist's face. "The primary samples are in the secure cold storage. Without proper decontamination procedures, breaching it would release the pathogen." "That's why we brought him," Sarah indicated Jackson. "He knows the protocols." A moment of silent calculation, then decision. "Follow my lead," Dr. Chen instructed, turning toward the biometric scanner. "Act like you're authorized personnel. If anyone questions you." The inner door opened to a scene from a nightmare dressed in scientific precision. The main laboratory stretched before them. A large open space, ringed by specialized workstations, centrifuges, genome sequencers, and isolation chambers. White-coated researchers moved between stations, focused on their deadly work. "Cold storage is at the far end," Dr. Chen murmured, leading them across the lab as if they belonged there. "Tear search servers are adjacent." Most of the scientists barely glanced up as they passed, accustomed to security personnel and visitors in a facility where questioning authority could prove fatal. Those who looked longer quickly averted their eyes from Blackwood's intimidating presence. At the cold storage entrance, Dr. Chen swiped her access card and pressed her hand to another scanner. "Once inside, you have 3 minutes before the environmental alarms trigger. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." Sarah turned to Marcus, who had grown alarmingly pale. "Stay here with Dr. Chen. Guide us through the server room access after." He started to protest, but couldn't find the strength. "The primary server node is behind the 3rd panel. Disconnecting it first will prevent data transfer to their backup site." Inside the cold storage vault, temperature-controlled racks held hundreds of labeled samples. Jackson moved with practiced efficiency, identifying the most critical materials, while Zoe prepared her specialized charges. "These are pure nightmare fuel," Jackson muttered, examining a rack marked Strain P47. "Engineered to target specific haplogroups. Airborne transmission, hemorrhagic symptoms, nearly 100% mortality. Can you neutralize them?" Sarah asked, aware of precious seconds ticking away. "Not directly, but Zoe's thermite charges will." He turned to the demolitions expert. "Place them here, here, and here. The heat will destroy everything organic and melt the storage media." As Zoe worked, Sarah and Layla slipped into the adjacent server room. Following Marcus's instructions, they located the primary server node and began the process of physically disabling it. "Download complete," Layla announced, removing a small drive from the system. "All their research data, personnel files, and deployment plans. Eleanor will want this." The facility's alarm suddenly blared to life, a pulsing, insistent wail that triggered immediate action throughout the lab. "We've been made," Blackwood called from the doorway. "Security teams mobilizing." 2 minutes to extraction, Max. They rushed from the server room to find Marcus slumped against Dr. Chen, barely conscious. Outside in the main lab, chaos had erupted as researchers rushed to secure sensitive materials amid the alarm. "Charges set," Zoe confirmed. "Remote detonation ready." "Our exit is cut off," Dr. Chen warned, looking toward the main doors where armed guards had appeared. "But there's a maintenance lift at the back of the lab. It leads to the loading dock." Half carrying Marcus between them, they fought their way through panicking scientists toward the service area. Behind them, coalition security forces breached the laboratory, shouting orders as they advanced with "Weapons raised! Cover!" Blackwood yelled, pulling Sarah and Marcus behind a heavy equipment rack as gunfire erupted. He and Zoe returned fire, creating a corridor for Jackson and Layla to reach the service lift. "Go!" Sarah urged, helping Marcus toward the lift where the others waited. "We're right behind you." As they reached the lift, Blackwood took a hit to his shoulder, stumbling but continuing to provide covering fire. Dr. Chen punched the emergency. Override for the lift doors, her access card still functioning despite the security lockdown. The doors began to close just as a security team flanked their position. Sarah pulled Blackwood into the lift as bullets pinged off the closing doors. The last thing she saw was the laboratory erupting into greater chaos as researchers realized the cold storage vault had been compromised. "Detonation in 30 seconds, Zoe announced as the lift descended, her thumb hovering over the remote trigger. "Brace yourselves." The explosion, when it came, was more felt than heard. A deep rumble that shook the entire facility, followed by secondary alarms shrieking through the emergency systems. "Direct hit," Zoe confirmed grimly. "Nothing survives that level of heat." The lift doors opened onto a loading dock in pandemonium. Emergency protocols had triggered evacuation procedures, with personnel streaming toward designated safe zones. Amid the confusion, their group slipped out through a service gate, Blackwood's injury and Marcus's deteriorating condition slowing their pace. "Extraction point is 8 blocks north," Blackwood gritted through clenched teeth. "Beta team should be waiting." They moved through streets crowded with confused civilians and responding coalition forces, blending in with the general evacuation. The facility behind them had smoke beginning to pour from upper vents, the fire suppression system struggling against Zoe's specialized charges. "We did it," Marcus whispered, a faint smile touching his lips despite his obvious pain. "We actually did it." Sarah supported him as they walked, every step clearly agony for him. "Save your strength, we're not home yet." As they approached the extraction point, an abandoned transit station, Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. Theoria was too quiet, lacking the chaos evident elsewhere in the sector. "Something's wrong," Blackwood murmured, clearly sensing. "The same." They rounded the final corner to find their worst fears confirmed. The extraction vehicles lay in smoking ruins. Better team nowhere to be seen. In their place stood a coalition checkpoint, hastily established to intercept fleeing personnel. "Trap!" Layla breathed. "They knew we were coming." They retreated into the shadow of a collapsed storefront, options rapidly dwindling. Marcus's condition was critical, Blackwood was losing blood, and coalition forces were systematically sweeping. "The area, secondary extraction point," Sarah asked desperately. Blackwood shook his head. "Other side of the sector. We'd never make it through these checkpoints." As despair threatened to overwhelm them, Sarah felt the folded paper in her jacket pocket. Ellie's drawing meant to be seen only on the journey home. Somehow, they needed to find a way back, if only so she could keep that promise. "There's another way," Marcus said weakly, his voice barely audible. "The river access tunnels. Coalition uses them to move supplies without civilian observation. I helped maintain the water pumps." "Can you guide us there?" Sarah asked. Marcus nodded faintly. 3 blocks east, underground access through the old subway entrance. The tunnels lead all the way to the perimeter. It was their only chance. As coalition forces closed in from multiple directions, the small group slipped deeper into the ruins of what had once been a thriving city, now the heart of an empire built on calculated extinction. Behind them, the research facility continued to burn, their mission accomplished, but their fight for survival only beginning. Before we discover if our heroes can escape the coalition's grasp, tell us in the comments what you do in this desperate situation, and make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow's chapter reveals whether their daring sabotage will lead to freedom or capture. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead, the steady rhythm marking time as Sarah and the others made their way through the abandoned subway tunnels. The air grew thicker with each step, deeper into the earth, heavy with decay and forgotten memories. Of a world before the collapse. "Not much further," Marcus whispered, his voice growing weaker despite Blackwood's makeshift field dressing. "Maintenance junction should be ahead." Sarah supported him on one side, while Layla took the other, his weight increasing as his strength faded. Behind them, Jackson and Zoe maintained vigilant watch, aware that coalition forces could appear at any moment. "He needs medical attention," Sarah murmured to Blackwood, who scouted several paces ahead. "Soon." The former Special Forces captain nodded grimly, his own wounded shoulder a spreading stain of crimson against his tactical gear. "First we survive, then we heal." The tunnel widened into what had once been a maintenance hub, a large chamber filled with defunct electrical panels and rusted tools. Faded safety posters peeled from damp walls, bureaucratic ghosts from a civilization now transformed. "There," Marcus pointed with a trembling hand, "service door, behind that panel." As Jackson and Blackwood worked to clear the path, Zoe rigged makeshift alarms at the tunnel entrances. Sarah eased Marcus down against a relatively dry wall, his pallor alarming in the beam of her flashlight. "Stay with me," she urged, pressing a water bottle to his lips. "We're almost out." His eyes, fever bright, found hers with unexpected clarity. "I need to tell you something. About the coalition." "Save your strength," she countered. "Tell me when we're safe." "No time." His hand gripped hers with surprising force. "The leadership, they're not military, not originally. They're the continuity of government protocol, cabinet members, agency directors, military commanders, all following contingency plans for societal collapse." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What are you saying?" "The coalition isn't some rogue faction. It's what remains of the federal government operating under martial law protocols. That's why they have the resources, the infrastructure." His voice dropped to ensure only she could hear. "And why Eleanor knows so much about their operations." "Before Sarah could process this revelation, Blackwood called out, "Doors clear, let's move." They helped Marcus to his feet and continued through the service door into a larger tunnel system, this one flowing with shallow water that splashed around their ankles. The air carried the distinct scent of the river, promising escape if they could reach it. 2 more junctions, then we reach the water processing station, Marcus directed, each word clearly costing him effort. From there, river access. They moved as quickly as his condition allowed, aware that each passing minute increased the risk of coalition forces finding them. Behind them, distant shouts suggested their pursuers had discovered their underground route. "They're gaining," Zoe warned, her hand resting on her remaining explosives. "I could collapse a section of the tunnel behind us." "Too risky," Blackwood vetoed. "Whole system might come down. Keep moving." At the second junction, they paused as Marcus oriented himself, his memory clearly struggling through pain and blood loss. "Left," he finally determined. Then down 1 level. The metal staircase leading down was slick with moisture, treacherous even without wounded companions. They descended carefully, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. "Water levels." "Aye," Marcus noted as they reached the bottom, where the tunnel was flooded knee-deep. "Must bear releases from upriver. Good for us. Means the outflow gates will be open." They waded forward, each step a battle against the current. Sarah felt Marcus growing heavier, his consciousness fading, despite his determination. "Stay with us," she urged. "Ellie's waiting for you." The mention of his niece seemed to provide momentary strength. The processing station should be just ahead. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, a bright light suddenly blinded them, reflecting harshly off the water. Sarah raced her, hand to shield her eyes, heart sinking as she made out multiple figures blocking their path. "That's far enough," commanded a voice that carried familiar authority. Weapons down, hands visible. As the light lowered slightly, Sarah recognized the distinctive uniform of Coalition Special Security, elite forces responsible for protecting crucial infrastructure and personnel. Their escape route was blocked by at least a dozen heavily armed operatives. "Options," Sarah whispered to Blackwood. He subtly shook his head. "Not with wounded." Before they could decide on a course of action, the security forces parted to allow a figure to step forward, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His uniform carried the insignia of the highest coalition leadership, General Harmon. Marcus breathed, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. "Welcome to the end of your mission," the general stated, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "I must commend you on your partial success. The research facility is indeed compromised, though I'm afraid our backup data remained intact. A significant delay, but hardly the crippling blow you hoped for. How did you find us?" Blackwood demanded. A smile touched the general's lips, devoid of warmth. "You've had a tracker among you from the beginning." He gestured toward their group. "Dr. Torres, your work here is done." The shock of betrayal hit like physical pain as Jackson stepped away from them, crossing the flooded tunnel to stand beside the coalition forces. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting their eyes. "They have my daughter. I had no choice." Zoe's hand moved imperceptibly toward her remaining explosive charges, but Blackwood subtly blocked her. Against these numbers, with their backs to pursuing forces, resistance meant suicide. "So this is the vaunted Restoration leadership team," General Harmon observed, studying them with clinical interest. "Eleanor has always had a talent for inspiring loyalty, however misguided." His gaze settled on Sarah. "Dr. Winters, your reputation precedes you. Your work on societal collapse and rebuilding strategies was quite prescient." "Genocide wasn't among my recommendations," Sarah responded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Targeted population management," the general corrected mildly. "Necessary for stabilization when resources cannot support remaining population levels. History is full of such difficult choices. History calls those choices by their proper name, atrocity," Sarah countered. The general's expression hardened. "Perspective is a luxury of the victors, Doctor. And today, that is not you." He gestured to his forces. "Secure them. The secretary will want to speak with them personally." As coalition soldiers moved forward, Marcus suddenly lurched upright, breaking free from Sarah's support. Before anyone could react, he staggered toward the tunnel wall, where a large valve control panel was mounted. "Marcus, no!" Sarah cried, recognizing his intent too late. With his remaining strength, Marcus wrenched the emergency flood control lever downward. An alarm immediately blared through the tunnel system, followed by the distant rumble of massive water gates opening. "Flood protocol initiated," a coalition soldier shouted as their radios crackled with urgent warnings. "Seal the upper levels," General Harmon ordered, his composure finally cracking. "All personnel evacuate immediately!" Chaos erupted as the distant rumble grew louder, millions of gallons of river water being diverted into the tunnel system. Coalition forces began retreating toward their entry point, discipline momentarily forgotten in the face of imminent flooding. Marcus collapsed after his final act of defiance, Sarah barely catching him before he hit the water. "Run!" he gasped. 30 seconds before the surge hits this section. Blackwood grasped the situation instantly. "Emergency stairs, 15 meters ahead. Move now!" Carrying Marcus between them, they fought through the rising water toward the maintenance stairs Blackwood had spotted. Behind them, General Harmon and his forces were already disappearing through their own exit, evacuation taking precedence over capturing prisoners. They reached the stairs just as a wall of water surged around the tunnel bend. A roaring torrent. Released by Marcus's desperate gambit, scrambling upward, water already climbing the lower steps, they burst through an access door into what appeared to be an abandoned waterfront warehouse. "Outside, quickly," Blackwood ordered, leading them toward loading bay doors as the building's lower level began flooding behind them. They emerged onto a deserted dock area, the grey light of early evening revealing the churning river before them and the distant silhouette of the city behind. Warning sirens wailed throughout the coalition sector, emergency protocols activated by the flooding tunnels. "We need to move before they regroup," Layla urged, scanning for immediate threats. There, Zoe pointed to a small maintenance boat moored further along the dock. "Our ticket out." As Blackwood and Layla moved to secure the boat, Sarah knelt beside. Marcus, who lay motionless on the wet concrete, his breathing had grown shallow, his pulse weak and erratic beneath her fingertips. "Stay with me," she pleaded, the words catching in her throat. "We made it out. We're going home." His eyes fluttered open, finding hers with effort. "Not me," he whispered. "Tell Ellie. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise." "You can tell her." "Yourself," Sarah insisted, tears threatening despite her resolve to stay strong. "The boat's right there. We'll get you back to Miguel, get you proper treatment." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some debts can only be paid one way." His hand found hers, pressing something into her palm. A small metal object she recognized as his sister's locket, the one he'd saved for Ellie. "Family is what we make it. You're her family now." Before Sarah could respond, Blackwood was beside them. "Boat's ready. We need to go now." Together they lifted Marcus, whose body had grown terrifyingly limp, and carried him to the waiting boat. Zoe had already started the engine, its quiet hum almost lost beneath the continuing sirens. As they pulled away from the dock, Sarah held Marcus's hand, watching helplessly as his breathing grew more labored. The mission had succeeded, but the cost was proving unbearably high. "Coalition vessels mobilizing upriver," Layla reported from her position at the bow. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they start patrol patterns." "Head for the eastern shore," Blackwood directed Zoe. "There's a restoration safe house in the hills, where we can regroup." Sarah barely heard the tactical discussion, her focus entirely on Marcus as the light in his eyes began to fade. "Stay with us," she urged again. "Ellie needs you. We all do." His lips moved, forming words too faint to hear above the engine and water. Sarah leaned closer, catching only fragments. "Never meant to survive this. Making amends." The last word faded into a final exhale as Marcus, maintenance worker, resistance fighter, savior, slipped away, his debt to humanity paid in full. Sarah closed his eyes gently, grief and fury warring within her. They had destroyed the bioweapon facility but lost a crucial member of their makeshift family. And Jackson's betrayal meant the coalition now knew Eleanor's plans, the restoration's capabilities, perhaps even their fallback locations. She lifted her gaze to the shoreline they approached, the beginning of a long journey back to whatever remained of Mount Haven and their scattered community. In her hand, she still clutched Marcus's final gift to Ellie, a tangible remnant of the family bonds that somehow persisted through civilization's collapse. The boat cut through darkening waters as the city behind them continued its emergency protocols. Coalition forces scrambling to contain both the flooding and the security breach. Their mission had bought humanity time, but at what ultimate cost, Sarah couldn't yet calculate. As the eastern shore grew closer, she finally remembered Ellie's drawing, still folded in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she withdrew and unfolded it, revealing the girl's vision of their future. The group standing together before rebuilt structures, green fields beyond, Marcus with his arm around his niece, Sarah beside them, all facing a sunrise depicted in brilliant yellows and oranges. At the bottom, in careful lettering, "For when you come home, so you remember what we're fighting for." Sarah carefully refolded the drawing, tucking it beside the locket she would somehow find the strength to deliver. Marcus had given his life to secure the future Ellie had drawn. Now it fell to the survivors to make that vision reality. Before we follow our remaining heroes on their perilous journey home, tell us in the comments which character's fate has touched you most deeply, and make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's chapter reveals the shocking aftermath of the coalition's discovery of the restoration's existence. Dawn broke over forested hills, painting the landscape in pale gold as Sarah and the survivors approached the restoration's safe house. The small cabin, nestled among towering pines, appeared untouched by the collapse that had transformed the world. Around it, no signs of coalition activity, Blackwood noted, scanning the perimeter with experienced eyes despite his wounded shoulder. Looks clear. They had abandoned the boat miles downriver, continuing on foot through the night to avoid coalition patrols. Exhaustion weighed on them like physical chains, their movements sluggish, their vigilance maintained only through grim determination. "Check it anyway," Zoe instructed, her voice hollow since witnessing Jackson's betrayal. Eleanor's daughter had barely spoken during their journey, her silence more concerning than any outburst would have been. Sarah remained at the tree line with Layla, while Blackwood and Zoe approached the cabin with tactical precision. After confirming it was secure, they waved the others forward. Inside, the safe house was Spartan but equipped with essentials, medical supplies, preserved food, communications equipment, and weapons. Sarah immediately helped Blackwood onto a chair to examine his wound, while Layla attempted to establish contact with Mount Haven, Restoration Emergency Channel. "This is Layla Rahman. Authentication code Sierra Tango 749. Do you copy?" Static answered her repeated attempts. "Nothing," she reported grimly. "Either their communications are down, or—" She left the alternative unspoken, or Mount Haven had already fallen. "Try the contingency frequencies," Zoe instructed, checking the cabin's perimeter defenses. "Protocol is to broadcast status updates at dawn and dusk." While Layla worked the radio, Sarah cleaned and rebandaged Blackwood's shoulder. "The bullet passed through," she told him, working with supplies from the cabin's medical kit. "No major arteries hit, but there's risk of infection," he nodded stoically. "I've had worse." "That doesn't make this not serious," she countered, administering antibiotics from their limited supply. A sudden burst of sound from the radio drew everyone's attention as Layla finally made contact. "Repeat. All restoration. Units implement Protocol Hawthorne immediately. Coalition forces have compromised primary and secondary locations. Converge on tertiary safe zones only. Authentication follows. Eleanor's voice, distorted by static but unmistakable, continued with a series of code words before the transmission cut off. "She's alive," Zoe whispered, relief momentarily breaking through her stoic facade. "Protocol. Hawthorne is full dispersal. Small groups, minimal digital footprint, relay communication only. What about Mount Haven?" Sarah asked. "The evacuation?" "If they implemented Hawthorne, they didn't have time for a full evacuation," Blackwood explained grimly. "Coalition must have moved faster than anticipated." Sarah's thoughts immediately went to Ellie, Miguel, and David. Had they escaped before Coalition forces arrived? Or had they been captured, perhaps killed in the assault? The not knowing was its own special torture. "We need to find them," she stated, the exhaustion in her voice temporarily replaced by determination. "We will," Layla assured her. "But first, we need to rest and plan. Running blind into Coalition territory would only get us captured or killed." Though every instinct screamed to keep moving, Sarah recognized the wisdom in Layla's words. They needed information, strength, and strategy, none of which they currently possessed in sufficient measure. 6 hours, Blackwood decided. We rest in shifts, gather intelligence through the emergency channels, then move toward the tertiary safe zone at nightfall. Sarah took the first watch, positioning herself by a window that overlooked the approach to the cabin. Behind her, the others settled into restless sleep, weapons within reach, even in repose. Marcus's absence hung in the air like a physical presence. The space he should have occupied painfully empty. From her pocket, Sarah withdrew Ellie's folded drawing and Marcus's locket, placing them side by side on the windowsill. Two tangible remnants of hope and connection in a world determined to sever both. "I'll find her," she whispered to Marcus's memory. "I promise." Hours later, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the forest floor, Sarah was jolted from uneasy. "Sleep by Zoe Sergeant Shake. Movement in the eastern perimeter," she whispered. "Multiple contacts. Everyone mobilized instantly. Weapons ready. Positions taken around the cabin's defensible points." Through the window, Sarah could make out figures moving among the trees, at least 6, possibly more, using tactical positioning that suggested military training. "Coalition?" she asked Blackwood, who studied the approaching group through binoculars. "Negative," he replied after a moment. "Mixed clothing, non-standard weapons. Could be scavengers, could be restoration, or it could be a trap," Layla added. "Coalition forces in civilian disguise." Blackwood made a quick decision. "Zoe, challenge Pattern Alpha. If they're restoration, they'll know the response." Zoe moved to the cabin door, partially shielded behind the frame. "Blue Ridge 7!" she called out, voice carrying across the clearing. The forest fell silent. Then a voice responded, "Mountain Pass, clear." Relief washed through the cabin. The correct countersign, these were restoration forces. "Hold positions." "Until visual confirmation," Blackwood cautioned, still wary of deception. The forest group emerged slowly, hands visible, led by a figure Sarah recognized with overwhelming relief. "Miguel," she breathed, lowering her weapon immediately. The former paramedic approached the cabin with 5 others, 3 men and 2 women Sarah didn't recognize, all bearing the exhausted, vigilant expression of those who had recently fled. "Aim for their lives." "Thank God," Miguel said as they reached the cabin. "We've been searching safe houses for 2 days." Sarah rushed forward, embracing him briefly before pulling back to ask the question that burned most urgently. "Ellie? David?" Miguel's expression fell. "David didn't make it. Coalition forces hit Mount Haven 6 hours after you left. He stayed behind with some others, holding the north gate to give the evacuation more time." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing another loss. David with his notched walking stick, marking time until a better world emerged. Now he would never see it. "And Ellie?" she pressed, dreading the answer. "She was with the first evacuation group," Miguel replied. "Last I saw, they were heading for the tunnel system with Eleanor. We got separated during the escape when Coalition air support hit our vehicles." So she could be with Eleanor, Sarah reasoned, clinging to hope. If they made it through, Miguel confirmed. Eleanor was heading for Safe Zone Echo. Inside the cabin, they exchanged information rapidly. Miguel's group had escaped through the forest as Mount Haven burned behind them, coalition forces systematically destroying everything the restoration had built. Their small convoy had been attacked en route to the designated rally point, forcing them to continue on foot through wilderness. They knew exactly where to hit us when we'd be most vulnerable. One of Miguel's companions, a former restoration security officer, explained bitterly. The traitor gave them everything. Jackson, Zoe confirmed, her voice flat. He was working for them all along. Miguel's expression darkened. There's worse news. The coalition isn't just destroying restoration outposts. They're implementing what they're calling the Reclamation Initiative, relocating all survivors in the region to controlled settlements. Compliance is mandatory. Forced labor camps, Layla translated grimly. With genetic screening, Miguel added. They're collecting DNA samples from everyone. Those with desirable traits are assigned to special facilities. The implications hung heavily in the air. Though they had destroyed the primary bioweapon research, the coalition's eugenic agenda continued through other means. We need to reach Safe Zone Echo, Sarah decided. Find Eleanor and the others, regroup and determine our next move. Blackwood studied the maps they'd found in the cabin. Echo is here. He indicated a point in the Cascade Mountains. 3 days on foot through coalition-controlled territory, if we're careful. We won't all make it as one group, Zoe observed pragmatically. Too many for stealth, too few for defense. So we split up, Layla suggested. Multiple routes. Better chances of at least some reaching the safe zone. Though the strategy made tactical sense, Sarah felt resistance to the idea of further separation. Their strength had always been in unity, in the bonds forged through shared survival. Yet logic prevailed over emotion. They would divide into 3 teams, each taking different approaches to Safe Zone Echo. As they prepared to depart, Sarah stood with Miguel near the cabin door. "Marcus?" he asked quietly, having noted his absence. "He didn't make it," she answered, the words still painful to speak aloud. "He saved us all, but the wound was too severe." Miguel closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this fresh loss. He found his redemption then. "At too high a cost," Sarah replied, her hand closing around the locket in her pocket. "I need to find Ellie. I promised him." "We'll find her," Miguel assured her, though they both knew such promises held little weight in their broken world. Night had fallen by the time they departed the safe house, 3 groups moving like shadows through the forest. Sarah traveled with Layla and 2 of Miguel's companions, taking the most direct route through the mountains. Blackwood led the second group along the river valley, while Zoe and Miguel would approach from the west. 3 days. Blackwood reminded them at parting, "If you reach Echo first, wait 24 hours. Then implement Hawthorne protocols if the others don't arrive." As Sarah's group moved deeper into the darkness, the weight of their mission settled heavily upon her shoulders. Somewhere ahead, if fortune finally favored them, Ellie waited, the last connection to Marcus, a child who somehow maintained hope when adults could not. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when the night sky behind them suddenly illuminated with a massive explosion. Turning, they watched in horror as a fireball rose above the tree line, the approximate location of the safe house they'd just vacated. "They found it," Layla whispered, her face ghostly in the distant firelight. "How are they tracking us?" The question lingered as they pushed forward with renewed urgency, the forest around them no longer feeling like shelter, but like a closing trap. The coalition was demonstrating resources and determination beyond what they had anticipated, systematically eliminating restoration outposts and personnel. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, finding temporary shelter in a rock formation that offered both concealment and defensive position. As the others took turns resting, Sarah kept watch, her mind turning over the events since their mission began. Jackson's betrayal explained how the coalition had found Mount Haven, but not how. They continued to locate restoration safe houses with such precision. Either they had more infiltrators than suspected, or they possessed tracking capabilities that the restoration had failed to counter. A troubling thought formed. What if someone among them carried a tracking device unknowingly? Coalition technology, according to Eleanor, had continued advancing despite the collapse. Microscopic traces, chemical markers, biological tags, all were within their capabilities. When Layla took over the watch, Sarah examined their supplies, equipment, even their clothing for anything suspicious. Finding nothing, she reluctantly concluded that either her theory was wrong or the method was beyond her ability to detect. They continued their journey through another day and night, avoiding small settlements and coalition patrols with increasing difficulty. The mountains loomed closer, their slopes promising both refuge and challenge. "We should reach the foothills by tomorrow evening," one of their companions, a former forest ranger named Tasha, estimated. Echo is nestled in a valley on the eastern face, naturally defensible with limited approach routes, which means those approaches will be watched, Layla pointed out, by both sides. On the third day, as they began their ascent into the mountains, they encountered the first signs of large-scale coalition movement. Fresh tire tracks on rarely used logging roads, portable communication arrays disguised among trees, automated drones patrolling the airspace above. "They're establishing a perimeter," Tasha observed with growing concern. "These positions, they're cutting off access to the entire mountain range." "Looking for something specific," Layla added, "or someone. This isn't standard patrol behavior." By nightfall, they had reached a vantage point overlooking a narrow valley. Below, nestled among protective rock formations and dense forest, a collection of structures marked Safe Zone Echo, the restoration's tertiary fallback position, designed to house key personnel and resources. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that something was wrong. The safe zone showed no signs of activity, no movement, no lights, no perimeter guards. Either strict blackout protocols were in effect, or the site was abandoned, or worse. "We need closer reconnaissance," Layla decided. "Tasha, you and I will approach from opposite sides. Sarah and Chris stay here as overwatch." "Be careful," Sarah cautioned as they prepared to depart. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, pull back immediately." As Layla and Tasha disappeared into the darkness, Sarah and Chris maintained vigilant watch on both the safe zone and the surrounding forest. An hour passed with agonizing slowness, each sound in the night drawing their immediate attention. The crack of a distant gunshot shattered the silence. Then another, then a sustained burst of automatic fire. "Something's wrong," Chris whispered, raising his binoculars. "I can't see them." Before Sarah could respond, movement caught her eye, figures emerging from the forest below, moving with tactical precision toward the safe zone. Even in the darkness, the distinctive outline of Coalition Special Forces was unmistakable. "It's a trap," she realized with sickening clarity. They were waiting for someone to approach. Chris keyed their emergency radio. "Abort mission, abort! Coalition forces active at Echo. Layla, Tasha, do you copy?" Only static answered his urgent call. "We need to extract," he told Sarah, already gathering their minimal equipment. "More will be coming once they secure the site." "We can't leave them," Sarah protested, though she knew their options were limited. 2 against what appeared to be full coalition strike team were suicidal odds. "If they've been captured, our best chance to help is to find Blackwood and the others," Chris reasoned. "If they've escaped, they'll head for the secondary rendezvous point." With bitter reluctance, Sarah retreated with Chris into the forest, circling wide around the compromised safe zone. As they moved, more gunfire echoed through the valley, followed by the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. "They brought air support," Chris noted grimly. "This isn't a standard patrol, it's a coordinated operation." dawn found them exhausted and demoralized, having pushed through the night to put distance between themselves and the coalition forces. They had seen no sign of Layla or Tasha, nor any indication that Blackwood's or Zoe's group had reached the area. Secondary rendezvous is here, Chris indicated on their map, a small hunting cabin 10 miles north of their current position. If anyone else escaped, that's where they'll go. As they prepared to continue, Sarah finally gave voice to the fear that had grown with each passing hour. What if no one else made it? What if we're the only ones left? Chris met her gaze steadily. Then we keep going. Find others, start again. That's what the restoration is about, continuing even when it seems impossible. His words echoed Eleanor's vision, the stubborn belief that humanity could rebuild from the ashes if enough people refused to surrender to despair. It was that same belief that had drawn Sarah to the restoration in the first place. Not just survival, but renewal. With renewed determination, they set a course for the secondary rendezvous, each step carrying them either toward reunion or greater isolation. Behind them, coalition forces secured another restoration outpost, their systematic dismantling of resistance, continuing with mechanical efficiency, and somewhere in the vast broken landscape between, a 12-year-old girl with a sketchbook full of hopeful futures might still be waiting to be found, if Sarah could just hold on to hope long enough to reach her. Before our journey continues through this ravaged land, tell us in the comments what you think awaits Sarah at the secondary rendezvous, and make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's chapter reveals whether any of her companions survived. The coalition's devastating trap. The hunting cabin appeared deserted as Sarah and Chris approached through early morning mist. Its weathered logs and sagging roof suggested abandonment long before the collapse, making it an ideal rendezvous point. Unremarkable enough to escape coalition attention. "Stay low," Chris whispered as they observed from the tree line. Could be watched. They had spent 2 days reaching the secondary rendezvous, forced to take circuitous routes to avoid coalition patrols that seemed to blanket the region. Twice they'd narrowly escaped detection, once hiding in a drainage culvert as troops passed mere feet away, the second time submerging themselves in a frigid stream as drones scanned the area. No movement, Sarah confirmed after 20 minutes of careful observation. No signs of recent occupation either. Doesn't mean it's clear, Chris cautioned. I'll circle around, approach from the rear. You cover from here. Sarah nodded, raising her rifle and sighting the cabin's entrance through the scope. As Chris disappeared into the underbrush, she controlled her breathing, calming the tremor in her hands that came from exhaustion and hunger. Their supplies had dwindled to almost nothing over the past days. A few jerky strips and water purification, tablets all that remained. Chris reappeared at the cabin's rear corner, moving with the silent precision of someone whose survival had long depended on stealth. He examined the ground around the structure, then the windows, before finally approaching the door with weapon ready. The door swung open at his touch, revealing darkness within. He disappeared inside, leaving Sarah tense and watchful. Long minutes passed before he reappeared in the doorway, lowering his weapon and signaling the all-clear. Abandoned, he confirmed when she joined him. No signs anyone's been here recently. The cabin's interior was sparse. A rustic table, 2 chairs, a small wood stove, and a crude platform bed frame without a mattress. Dust covered most surfaces, undisturbed except for the tracks of small creatures seeking shelter. "We're the first to arrive," Sarah concluded, trying to mask her disappointment. She had desperately hoped to find Blackwood or Zoe's group already here, or by some miracle, Ellie and Eleanor, or the only ones who made it. Chris voiced the darker alternative, checking the cabin's corners for anything useful. Sarah refused to entertain that possibility. The rendezvous protocol allows for a 3-day window. Others could still be coming. Chris nodded, allowing her this hope without commenting on its likelihood. He knelt by the wood stove, examining it with practiced eyes. We can risk a small fire after dark. It's well ventilated, and the stovepipe is intact. Heat without visible smoke. They settled into watchful waiting, taking turns monitoring the approaches to the cabin while the other rested. Sarah used the daylight hours to take inventory of the cabin's meager offerings, some forgotten tools, fishing line tangled in a drawer, a half-empty box of shotgun shells that didn't match any weapon they carried. As dusk approached, Sarah took up position at the cabin's single window, a perfect vantage point for the most likely approach route. The forest had grown quiet, save for the occasional bird call or rustling leaves. Too quiet, perhaps. Her instincts prickled a moment before she actually saw movement, a shadow detaching from the deeper shadows of the forest. Then another. Human figures moving with deliberate stealth toward the cabin. "Contact," she whispered to Chris, who immediately took position beside the door. "At least two, approaching from the north." "Coalition?" he asked, checking his weapon. "Can't tell. They're being careful." They watched as the figures advanced, using trees for cover, clearly aware of potential threats. Their movement patterns suggested training, but not the rigid tactical approach typical of coalition forces. When the figures were approximately 50 yards from the cabin, Sarah noticed something that made her heart leap. One was supporting the other helping a clearly injured companion across the difficult terrain. I think it's Blackwood," she whispered, recognition dawning. And Zoe. Relief surged through her as the figures drew closer, confirming her identification. Blackwood's distinctive silhouette was unmistakable despite his obvious limp. Zoe moved beside him, weapon ready, constantly scanning for threats. Chris risked a careful signal from the doorway. 3 quick flashes from a shielded light, the restoration recognition pattern. After a pause, Zoe responded with the correct counter-signal. Minutes later, they helped Blackwood through the door, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. A crude bandage wrapped his lower leg, dark with dried blood. "Patrol ambush," he explained as they eased him onto the bed frame. 2 days ago, lost Harrison and Santos." Zoe secured the door behind them, her expression grim but controlled. "Coalition forces are everywhere. They're conducting a systematic sweep of the entire region." "We noticed," Chris replied darkly. "Safe Zone Echo was compromised. We lost Layla and Tasha." Sarah unwrapped Blackwood's bandage, revealing an ugly gash that traveled from knee to mid-calf. "Knife?" she asked, already reaching for their limited medical supplies. "Fragment from a perimeter mine," he confirmed. "Designed to disable, not kill. They're taking prisoners when they can." "Why?" Sarah asked, cleaning the wound as best she could. Zoe answered, her voice flat. "Information, leverage, test subjects, take your pick." As they treated Blackwood's injury, they exchanged intelligence, each group's journey, observations of coalition movements, the pattern emerging from scattered encounters. "They're not just hunting restoration members," Blackwood concluded. "They're clearing the entire area. Everyone they find gets processed, either to labor camps or special research facilities." "The bioweapon program," Sarah realized. "We only destroyed one facility. They're continuing elsewhere and expanding," Zoe added grimly. "Mother believed they were developing targeted pathogens as a contingency plan. Now it seems they've moved it to primary status." The implications hung heavy in the cabin's close air. The mission they'd risked everything for had been merely a setback for the coalition, not the crippling blow they'd hoped. "Any sign of Miguel's group?" Sarah asked, the question she'd been dreading to voice. "None," Blackwood replied, his expression softening slightly. "But they were taking the western approach, the least patrolled, according to our intel. They might have the best chance of all of us." It was cold comfort, but Sarah clung to it nonetheless. "And no word about Eleanor or Ellie." Zoe's expression hardened at the mention of her mother. "Nothing definitive. Rumors among some refugees we encountered suggested a high-value restoration group broke through the Southern Coalition perimeter, but—" She shrugged, unwilling to offer false hope. Night settled fully around the cabin as they finished tending to Blackwood's wound. Chris risked a small fire in the wood stove, the minimal heat a luxury after days of exposure to the elements. They rationed their remaining food, barely enough for one meager meal each. "We need a plan," Blackwood stated, propped against the wall beside the bed frame. "This rendezvous was our last organized fallback position. After this, we're operating without structure." "We could head farther north," Chris suggested, "into Canada. Coalition control thins out past the border." "Just running," Zoe countered, a hint of her mother's steel in her voice. "Leaving everyone else behind, I won't do it. We have minimal supplies, limited ammunition, and no communication with other restoration members," Blackwood pointed out pragmatically. "Our operational capacity is effectively zero." Sarah listened to their debate while keeping watch at the window. The logical part of her mind, the academic who had once analyzed historical crisis responses from the safety of a university office, recognized the strategic wisdom in retreat. Regroup, rebuild, return stronger. But the woman who had promised Marcus she would find his niece, who had held his hand as he died, could not abandon that obligation. "I'm going to the processing center," she stated suddenly, cutting through the ongoing discussion. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in disbelief. "What processing center?" Chris asked. "The one Blackwood just mentioned," she replied. "Where they're taking prisoners. If Layla and Tasha were captured, that's where they'll be. Maybe Miguel and the others too, maybe even Ellie." "That's suicide," Blackwood stated flatly. "Those facilities are maximum security. Central processing is likely at the Coalition headquarters in Portland." "Then that's where I'm going," Sarah insisted. "With what army?" Zoe asked, though something in her expression had shifted, not dismissal, but calculation. Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I don't need an army. I need information, a way in, and a plan for getting people out." "Impossible," Blackwood declared. "Even at full strength with all our resources, the restoration couldn't breach central processing." "Not from the outside," Sarah agreed. "But from the inside." Understanding dawned on Zoe's face. "You want to get captured, deliberately." Sarah nodded. "With the right preparation, the right embedded resources, I could—" "Get yourself killed," Blackwood interrupted harshly. "Or worse. The bioweapon program targets specific genetic markers," Sarah continued, her plan crystallizing as she spoke. "They're screening everyone they process. Some go to labor camps, others to research facilities. If we could access their selection criteria, disrupt their screening protocols." "You'd need someone on the inside with technical access," Chris pointed out. "Someone who understands their systems." "Layla," Sarah confirmed. "If she's been captured, she'd be the most valuable asset they could have. A systems engineer with restoration knowledge. They wouldn't send her to a labor camp." "This is still a suicide mission," Blackwood insisted, though his tone had shifted from dismissal to reluctant consideration. "Not with proper preparation," Zoe interjected, surprising them all. "And not if we create a significant enough distraction." "Elsewhere," she moved to the table, brushing dust away to create a clean surface. Using a stick of charcoal from the wood stove, she began sketching a rough map. "Coalition forces are concentrated here, here, and here," she indicated, marking positions they had observed during their journey. "Their attention is divided between hunting down restoration members and processing general population. If we could create a threat significant enough to draw forces away from the processing center." "What kind of threat?" Chris asked, leaning forward with interest. "The kind that speaks their language," Zoe replied grimly. "I still have enough explosives to make an impression if placed strategically." "You're seriously considering this?" Blackwood asked incredulously. "I'm considering that Sarah's right," Zoe answered. "Retreating north means abandoning everyone else. My mother would never do that, and neither will I." The discussion continued into the night, transforming gradually from theoretical debate to actual planning. By dawn, the outline of an audacious, perhaps insane, operation had formed. Zoe would create a diversion at a coalition supply depot they had passed during their journey, drawing forces away from the central processing facility. Blackwood, despite his injury, would establish an extraction point near the city perimeter, ready to receive escapees. Chris would position himself as Overwatch, providing intelligence on coalition movements and emergency support if needed. And Sarah would allow herself to be captured, carrying hidden components that, once inside, could be assembled into tools for escape, both for herself and for others. "It's still a terrible plan," Blackwood stated as they finalized details. "But it's better than no plan." Before they could continue, a sound outside froze them all in place, footsteps approaching without attempt at stealth, multiple sets moving directly toward the cabin. They took defensive positions instantly, weapons ready as the footsteps reached the porch. A moment of silence followed, then a loud knock on the door. "Restoration Protocol Alpha 7, called a voice from outside. "Blue skies above." The recognition code, but policy dictated caution. It could be coalition forces using extracted information, counter-recognition. "Required," Blackwood called back. "Valley below." "Shows the path forward," came the immediate response. "For those with eyes to see." Correct, but still they hesitated. Coalition interrogation techniques were known to be thorough. "Identify," Zoe demanded. "Eleanor Chen, Restoration Command," the voice replied. "With 4 companions. Open the door, Zoe. We've walked through hell to reach you." Zoe moved forward, hope and suspicion warring on her face as she carefully unbarred the door. It swung open to reveal 5 figures standing on the porch. At their center, Eleanor Chen herself, looking haggard but unbowed. And beside her, clutching a familiar sketchbook, stood Ellie. The cabin erupted into controlled chaos as the newcomers entered. Eleanor immediately took charge, her natural authority undiminished by her evident exhaustion. With her were Ellie, 2 restoration security officers Sarah didn't recognize, and, most surprisingly, Dr. Helen Chen from the Coalition Research Facility. "Mom," Zoe whispered, embracing Eleanor briefly before professional composure reasserted itself. Sarah found herself speechless as Ellie approached hesitantly, the girl's eyes searching for someone who wasn't there. "Uncle Marcus?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Sarah knelt to eye level with her, reaching into her pocket to withdraw the locket. "He saved us all," she said softly, placing the treasured object in Ellie's small hand. "He wanted you to have this, and he loved you very much." Tears welled in the girl's eyes, but she stood straight, nodding with a composure far beyond her years. Without words, she threw her arms around Sarah, the embrace communicating everything words could not. "We have limited time," Eleanor announced, addressing the entire group. "Coalition forces are converging on this region. We need to move within the hour." "We were just developing a plan to infiltrate the central processing facility," Blackwood informed her, "to extract captured restoration personnel." Eleanor's expression shifted to one of grim approval. "Good, because that's precisely where we're headed, though for a different purpose." She gestured to Dr. Chen. "Dr. Chen has brought us critical intelligence. The Coalition's bioweapon program wasn't their primary initiative. It was the backup plan." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific demeanor at odds with her travel-worn appearance. "The Purity Protocol was designed as population control through selective pathogen targeting, but the primary directive was always Project Genesis, controlled repopulation through genetic selection." "Meaning what exactly?" Sarah asked, though she feared she already understood. "They're not just sending people to labor camps," Dr. Chen explained. "Those with specific genetic profiles are being directed to specialized facilities. Women of childbearing age with desired genetic markers are being prepared for mandatory participation in a controlled breeding program." The horror of this revelation settled over the cabin like a physical weight. "How close are they to implementing this?" Blackwood asked. "They already have," Eleanor answered grimly. The first Genesis facility is operational within the Central Processing Center, and according to Dr. Chen's information, they've already begun the program with the first group of captives. Layla, Sarah breathed, the pieces connecting in her mind. If they captured her at Echo, her genetic profile would match their criteria, Dr. Chen confirmed. Middle Eastern heritage has specific immune factors they're selecting for. Eleanor's eyes blazed with cold fury. This ends now. We're going to infiltrate the processing center, extract our people, and destroy their entire program, both the research and the implementation. With what resources? Blackwood asked, though his tone was not challenging but practical. We're down to bar essentials here. A grim smile touched Eleanor's lips as she unfolded a detailed map on the table. That's why I brought reinforcements. The restoration isn't as broken as the Coalition believes. She tapped specific locations on the map. 3 teams are already in position around Portland. We've been planning this operation since we discovered the existence of Project Genesis. As Eleanor outlined her plan, more comprehensive and better resourced than their improvised scheme, Sarah felt a tug on her sleeve. Ellie held out her sketchbook, open to a new drawing. The page showed their group standing before a fallen coalition. Facility, dawn breaking behind them. In the foreground, stick figures of all sizes walked toward the sunrise, freed captives following a path to a new beginning. This is what happens next, Ellie stated, with the simple conviction of a child who hadn't yet learned that hope could be foolish. I drew it last night. Sarah studied the image, recognizing that Ellie had drawn not what was, but what needed to. Not a prediction, but a purpose. In that moment, she understood that their fight wasn't just against the Coalition's atrocities, but for the future this child still believed in. Then, we'd better make it happen, she replied, standing to join Eleanor at the map table. Tell us what you need us to do. The plan took shape with surprising speed, combining Eleanor's strategic vision with the tactical knowledge of those present. By mid-morning, they were ready to move, not as desperate survivors, but as a coordinated force with a clear objective. As they prepared to depart, Sarah found a moment alone with Ellie, who would remain safely hidden with one of these security officers. While the operation proceeded, I have something for you, too, Sarah said, drawing out the folded paper Ellie had given her before the bioweapon facility mission. I kept my promise. I looked at it when we were coming home. Ellie took the drawing, smoothing its creases with careful fingers. It's not right anymore, she said quietly. Uncle Marcus isn't here. No, Sarah agreed gently. But what he fought for still is, what he believed in. The girl considered this, then opened her sketchbook to a blank page. I'll draw a new one. For after. Sarah squeezed her shoulder, finding strength in this child's resilience. For after, she agreed. And this time, we'll make sure it comes true. Outside the cabin, the others were making final preparations. Eleanor stood with Zoe, mother and daughter, united in purpose despite their different paths. Blackwood checked weapons with Chris and the security officers, his injury no longer a source of complaint, but simply a factor to be accounted for, and Dr. Chen, once part of the system they now sought to destroy, reviewed facility layouts and security protocols with methodical precision. Her expertise transformed from tool of oppression to instrument of liberation. They were an unlikely army, academics, engineers, security personnel, and a defecting scientist, yet in their diversity lay their strength. Each brought unique skills, perspectives, and motivations to a common cause. The belief that humanity deserved better than the Coalition's vision of controlled evolution. As they departed the cabin, moving through forest shadows toward their separate infiltration points, Sarah found herself thinking not of the dangers ahead, but of Ellie's newest drawing, not yet created but already clear in its intent. A future worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Behind them, the hunting cabin stood empty once more, a brief sanctuary in a broken world. Ahead lay Portland, the coalition's stronghold, and within it, both captives to free and a monstrous program to dismantle. The final battle for America's soul was about to begin. Before we witness the ultimate confrontation between the Restoration and the Coalition, tell us in the comments what sacrifice you think our heroes may need to make to secure humanity's future, and make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's final chapter will reveal the fate of our survivors and the new world they hope to build. Dawn painted Portland's broken skyline gold as Sarah crouched behind a rusted truck, observing the Coalition's processing center. Armed guards patrolled its perimeter while civilians waited in lines for processing. Families with hollow eyes who had surrendered hope for safety. Phase 1 in position, Zoe confirmed through Sarah's earpiece. Charges set. Phase 2 ready, added Eleanor from her position with the extraction team. Sarah discarded her weapons and tactical gear, transforming into a desperate civilian. The only items she retained were carefully concealed, thin tools sewn into her clothing, a miniaturized data device, and Ellie's drawing tucked into her boot. She joined the processing line, eventually reaching a checkpoint. Name and former occupation? Sarah Williams. I was a teacher. This earned her placement in Category B to Special Program Consideration. Inside, Sarah followed the designated path through medical screening, where blood was drawn and DNA collected. In the waiting area, she spotted Layla among red-banded prisoners, captured resistance fighters. Their eyes met briefly before Layla masked her recognition. At exactly 11, an explosion shook the building. Zoe's diversion had begun. Minutes later, the power failed as planned. In the darkness, Sarah slipped away through a service door, using a stolen security keycard to navigate deeper into the facility. She encountered a security technician who revealed himself as a restoration sympathizer. Eleanor's network reaches deeper than they know, he whispered, giving her system access and an EMP device for the high-security areas. Sarah made her way to the top level where, according to the technician, high-value prisoners had been moved. Using the EMP device to disable electronic security, she discovered Layla in a conference room with General Harmon and Coalition officials. Already extracted the necessary genetic material from the priority subjects, a scientist was saying. The program can proceed regardless of today's security failures. When facility-wide alarms triggered an evacuation, Sarah used the confusion to strike. She neutralized 2 guards and overpowered General Harmon with Layla's help, securing him with his own restraints. The others? Sarah asked once Layla was freed. 2 levels down, holding cells near the medical testing facilities. 15, maybe 20 of our people. They descended into a facility now in chaos. Someone, likely the sympathetic technician, had remotely unlocked many cells. Confused prisoners filled the corridors while overwhelmed guards attempted to maintain order. Restoration forces, Sarah called out. Follow us to extraction point, Charlie, if you want out. They gathered more escaped prisoners, including Tasha, who had been brutally interrogated but survived. Their growing group, nearly 30 strong, fought through a security checkpoint to reach the loading bay where Eleanor's team waited with transport vehicles. Sarah, Eleanor called. General status? Harmon secured, facility compromised. Genesis program interrupted, but they've already collected genetic samples from prisoners. Eleanor's expression hardened. We'll deal with that next. For now, we get our people out. She activated her comm. All teams begin final withdrawal, 60 seconds to demolition charges. As prisoners boarded the transports, Sarah learned Blackwood's team was still maintaining the diversion at the main entrance, a sacrificial element buying time for the extraction. I'm going back for them, she decided. That wasn't the plan, Eleanor countered. Plans change. Get these people out. The facility shook with planned demolition charges as the first 2 vehicles departed. Eleanor paused before boarding the final transport. We'll hold the southwestern route open as long as possible, but Get Ellie somewhere safe, Sarah requested. Make sure she has a chance to draw that future she believes in. Eleanor clasped her arm. Find your people and come home, Dr. Winters. We're going to need historians in the world we're building. Sarah fought her way to the main entrance where Blackwood's team was surrounded by coalition forces. Through a security station, she discovered maintenance tunnels beneath the main plaza and transmitted an escape plan to Blackwood. She navigated to an access point as restoration fighters conducted a fighting retreat toward her position. One by one, they descended into the tunnel, Zoe, then others, with Blackwood last, providing covering fire before dropping down. Zoe's final explosive charge sealed the tunnel behind them, blocking pursuit. The group, now 7 from the original 12, navigated underground passages until emerging at a drainage outfall. In the distance, the processing center burned as coalition emergency response focused there. A vehicle approached, Miguel driving a modified civilian truck. Eleanor sent us back, he explained as they loaded the wounded. Said something about not leaving historians behind. As they pulled away, Sarah watched Portland receding in the mirror. The coalition's symbol of control continued to burn, but she harbored no illusions. They had defeated the organization itself. Where to? She asked Miguel. New beginning. Eleanor's established a fresh restoration base in the Olympic Peninsula. Defensible, self-sufficient, remote enough to rebuild our strength. Sarah thought of Ellie, waiting at this new sanctuary, sketchbook in hand, imagining the world that might follow this victory. In her pocket, she still carried the child's drawing, not a prediction, but a purpose, a vision to work toward. As the vehicle continued northward, Sarah turned her gaze from the past burning behind them to the uncertain future ahead. America had fallen, its institutions corrupted, its promise betrayed. But from these ashes, something new could emerge. Not a restoration of what had been, but the creation of what should be. A society built on the hard-earned wisdom of collapse and survival, valuing not just strength, but compassion, not just order, but justice. Looking at the determined faces around her, Blackwood with his stoic resilience, Zoe with her fierce commitment, Miguel with his healer's heart, Sarah found herself sharing something of Ellie's faith. America had fallen. But Americans, in all their diversity, stubbornness, and irrepressible hope, remained. And as long as they did, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. Before this journey continues, tell us in the comments what you envision for the next chapter of America's rebirth, and make sure you're subscribed because the fight for humanity's future has only just begun.